today, so it's going to be an interesting experiment trying to teach without a voice and not being able to move around, but hopefully this will work out okay, and by Monday I'll sound normal again. So a couple of announcements. Just to remind you, next exam is in class on Wednesday next week. Please go wherever you went last time. So if you took I'm trying to make it loud enough so you can hear me, but without the feedback. Can people hear me like that? Is that okay? Okay. So wherever you took the exam last time, go back there next Wednesday. The GA will lead a review session Tuesday, 8:40 here, so please bring your questions, and it'll include material up through the end of our discussion of stereotypes, and that's it, including the reading for stereotypes. And there's a stereotype discussion next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. And the location will be sent out in the email. But if you haven't done that requirement or you're interested to discuss the topic more, you should plan to attend that discussion. Okay, so we left off yesterday, back when I had more hair and a better voice, to talking about different theories of where prejudice comes from. And we talked about realistic conflict theory that argued that groups develop prejudice because they're in conflict with each other over limited resources. And I mentioned at the end of class that a problem with that account, in terms of the Robbers Cave experiment, was that the campers disliked each other as soon as they met each other. They did not wait until they were in conflict with each other in the tournament. They disliked each other from the moment they encountered each other. And so that's a problem for realistic conflict theory. If you don't need a conflict to develop prejudice, well, where does the prejudice come from? And one alternative was proposed by a French psychologist named Henri Tajfel, and he proposed what became known as minimal groups theory. And the basic idea of minimal group theory is that you don't need competition to get prejudice between groups. Instead, and this is sort of a troubling prediction, Tajfel argued that the very creation of groups necessarily leads to prejudice. That simply having two groups, even if they're not in competition with one another for resources, leads them to develop negative attitudes toward each other. It's just a natural way that groups function. And so, to support his idea that groups out of necessity develop prejudice, even without conflict, Tajfel developed what he termed a minimal groups paradigm. The basic idea of a minimal group paradigm is you create groups that are not in conflict, they aren't based on anything important or serious, they're created totally in an arbitrary fashion, and you see whether these arbitrary groups, these minimal groups, develop prejudice towards one another, even though there's no reason for them to. And so here's the typical paradigm that Tajfel used in creating minimal groups. He would take groups of high school students or college students, and he'd show them pairs of paintings. And he would ask them individually to pick which painting they liked better. The paintings, importantly, are abstract paintings. This is going to be important for the creation of minimal groups. The paintings are abstract paintings. They're by two modern abstract artists, Klee and Kandinsky. They're not labeled. So when you are shown two pictures, they're abstract. You say which one you like better, but you don't know if the one that you like better is by Klee or by Kandinsky. After expressing your preferences, the experimenter tells you that you are, based on your preferences, somebody who likes Kandinsky more, or based on your preferences, you're somebody who likes Klee more. But that's totally done randomly. It's not based on your answers at all. They're just randomly assigning you either to be in the Klee group or the Kandinsky group. So you've expressed some preference, but you don't really have an idea of who made what piece of art. And then you're randomly assigned to a group. So this is really a minimal group. You're put together with other Kandinsky lovers, even though you haven't talked about how you all love Kandinsky, you didn't know you loved Kandinsky, it just was what you thought was your preferences. And then you and the other members of the Kandinsky group are not allowed to talk to each other about how much you love Kandinsky. So there's no opportunity to develop any group coherence. It's really arbitrary. So no conflict, no competition, you just are connected to these people based on this arbitrary characteristic. And then Tajfel is going to put you in a situation to see if you show prejudice and or stereotypes and or discrimination toward members of the other group, which you could have, of course, just as simply have ended up in, but you didn't. The idea is that something as silly as this, a flimsy criteria like which modern artist do you like better, if something that silly is enough to lead to prejudice, then it would suggest that the development of prejudice is a necessary function of the existence of groups. And so Tajfel was able to show in a number of studies that creating these minimal groups was adequate, it was sufficient to produce prejudice. And let me tell you about one study in some more detail, using yet another paradigm for developing minimal groups, but they could have done this with the Clay versus Kandinsky division, and it would have worked just as well. Subjects in the study were 14-year-old British high school kids. They knew each other very well, they were all in the same class. They were told that they were taking part in a study of visual judgments. And so as part of the study, they looked at a computer screen and they saw dots on the screen. And they were asked to judge how many dots they saw on the computer screen. After the task, the subjects were told, some people have a tendency to see more dots than there actually are on the screen. They are overestimators of how many dots are on the screen. And other people just seem to naturally see fewer dots than there actually are on the screen. They are underestimators of the amount of dots that are on the screen. And the subjects were randomly told that they were either an underestimator or an overestimator. And again, it was not based on their performance at all. It was simply due to random assignment. But it was an ambiguous situation, so it was plausible to the subjects that, I could be an overestimator or underestimator. The subjects were also told, and this is critical, there's no really big difference between being an underestimator and being an overestimator. So it's not like overestimators are smarter or underestimators are cooler. They're specifically told there is this distinction, but it doesn't map onto anything important. So in this way, Tajfel's created minimal groups of overestimators and underestimators. They're told there are no differences, but the groups exist, just like creating a group of people with a Clay preference versus a Kandinsky preference. Then, Tajfel gives the subjects the opportunity to behave either well or not well towards members of the other group. And here's how he did this. He gave them a task where they had to assign rewards and sometimes penalties to members of their own group as well as members of the other group. So if they were an overestimator, they were assigning rewards and penalties to other overestimators as well as to underestimators. And it involved assigning possible points. And the way that the situation worked was that the teams would get prizes for how many points they earned. But it was not a competition.